The train didn't slow down when it entered the valley. It screamed across the rails like a wounded thing, metal grinding against metal, sparks flying into the frozen air. We had been on it for days, packed in a dark wooden box, the smell of sweat and fear mixing with the stench of the bucket in the corner. No one spoke anymore. We had run out of questions, and those who still had answers had learned not to share them. The guards rode outside the doors with rifles, boots on the metal steps, their breath forming ghosts in the cold. Every hour, one of them struck the side of our wagon with a club. If someone didn't answer from the inside, they opened the door and dragged out the corpse. The Soviets called it transportation. To us, it was already a sentence. When the doors finally slid open, the cold punched the air out of my lungs. Snow blew sideways across a landscape so white it looked like the world hadn't been invented yet. Guards shouted numbers, not names. "Out! Move! Faster!" The sound of their voices was sharp against the emptiness. We stumbled down from the wagon, legs numb, hands cuffed. My boots sank into snow up to the ankle. I didn't dare complain. Someone behind me whispered a curse, and the nearest guard swung his rifle like a hammer. The man dropped without even a cry. "No speech," the guard barked. "No questions." The Soviet posters back home had promised the Gulag was a place of correction, a place where men could rebuild themselves through labor. But the moment I saw the camp, rusted wire, wooden barracks leaning like dying animals, towers with silhouettes holding rifles, I realized the first thing the Soviets never told anyone. The Gulag wasn't built to correct. It was built to erase. Inside the processing hut, they stripped us naked. The floor was ice. A guard with gloves tossed our clothes into piles, sometimes handing them back, sometimes not. They shaved our heads with dull blades. One man bled so badly the guard shoved snow on his scalp to freeze it shut. Another prisoner tried to ask how long his sentence was. The room went silent. A guard stepped forward and hit him across the face so hard, blood sprayed onto the wall. "You want to know how long?" the guard said. "Long enough." We were pushed to a table where an officer sat behind a ledger. He didn't look at us, almost as if we were livestock. He wrote down our names, scratched them out, and replaced them with numbers. Mine was 427B. When he stamped the page, it felt like a burial. They handed us uniforms that smelled of mold and fear. Some had bullet holes. All were too thin for the cold. "Welcome to Kolyma," the guard said without emotion, "the land of the living dead." Someone laughed in the back. The guard turned and said, "You'll learn." We were marched to the barracks. The snow cracked loudly under our steps, the only sound in a world that seemed made of silence. Inside, the barracks were dark, lit only by a single lantern hung from a bent nail. The bunks were stacked 3 high. Men with hollow cheeks and vacant stares watched us enter. They didn't look curious. They looked sorry. I took the only empty bunk left, middle level, next to a man whose eyes were so sunken it was hard to tell if he was awake. "How long have you been here?" I whispered. He shook his head slowly, whispered back, "Don't ask. Not here." His voice cracked like wood. "You get used to not knowing." That night the cold settled into my bones. I could feel the breath of the man above me through the slats. It smelled like sickness. The air was heavy, damp, stale. Somewhere in the room, someone coughed violently. No one moved. No one offered help. The only rule was survive until morning. Just as I was drifting into a thin, uneasy sleep, a scream tore through the darkness. It wasn't long, maybe a second, maybe less, but sharp enough to freeze every breath in the room. Boots thundered outside. A door slammed, then silence. The prisoner beside me didn't look up. He whispered, "They take one every night, sometimes 2. "What for?" I asked. He turned his head slightly, eyes reflecting the lantern's last flicker. "To remind us the door only opens one way." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the thin walls of the barracks. It sounded almost like a voice, a warning carried across the white void. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath, but the scream kept replaying in my mind. And just as I began to drift back into the cold, the man above me whispered a sentence so quietly I thought I imagined it. "Tomorrow," he said, "is when the real correction begins." The barracks went silent again, but I didn't sleep. The whistle blew long before the sun rose, though in Kolyma, sunrise was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. It was a thin, metallic wail that sliced through the barracks and into the bones. Men shot upright like puppets on a string. Those who didn't were dragged upright by others, not out of kindness, out of fear of the guards seeing a body that didn't move fast enough. In the Gulag, hesitation was treated like rebellion. We stumbled outside, breaths turning to ghosts in the air. The cold was so sharp, it felt like my skin would crack open. "Work detail," the guard shouted, though it wasn't necessary. All we did was work. Work until the world blurred, until the body failed, until the mind broke. Work was the point. Work was the punishment. Work was the killing method. The Soviets never said that part. We walked toward the forest line where the trees stood like tall executioners. A foreman waited there with a clipboard. His nose was red, frostbitten. He looked at us like we weren't men but broken tools. "Who's new?" he asked. Someone nudged me forward. The foreman sized me up, smirked, and pointed to a pile of frozen logs. "You carry those, all day." I stared at the logs. Each one looked like it weighed more than I did. "The faster you work," he said, "the more you eat." That was the lie the Soviets told the world, that the Gulag was a labor camp where men could improve themselves through honest work. But Kolyma never rewarded strength, it punished it. Strong workers were pushed harder until they broke. Weak ones were allowed to starve quietly. Those who collapsed didn't go to the infirmary. They went into the snow. I lifted the first log. My spine screamed. My hands went numb in seconds. The cold made every breath feel like swallowing knives. The older prisoners worked with terrifying efficiency, not because they were strong, but because moving fast meant staying warm enough not to die. One man beside me, face wrapped in a filthy scarf, whispered, "Don't slow down, the cold notices." He wasn't joking. By midday, my body felt hollow. Every movement sent pain through muscles I didn't know I had. A guard strolled by, cigarette dangling from his lips. "Pick it up," he said. "You're eating too much for how little you work." He wasn't exaggerating. Food rations were mathematically engineered to kill. 400 grams of bread for a full shift, 300 for a partial shift, 200 for failure. Men who dropped to 200 only had days left. We called it the death slide. Once you started it, you didn't stop. A prisoner ahead of me fell to his knees. His log rolled out of his arms. The foreman smirked and checked his clipboard. "One less mouth for dinner," he said. "Move around him." And we did. Not because we were cruel, because stopping meant dying with him. Hours passed. The sun never truly rose, but the gray brightened enough to reveal the camp's ugliness in full detail. The wire fences sagged under the weight of frost. The watchtower roofs were buried in snow. The guards huddled together for warmth while we shivered alone. At midday, we received lunch. Watery soup with floating bits of cabbage. We ate it outside, the bowls burning our hands even through the cold. A man whispered, "Feels warm now. Later, frozen solid inside your gut." He was right. The pain hit minutes after eating. By late afternoon, frost formed on my eyebrows, lashes, even my breath. Every exhale froze into tiny crystals on my scarf. My fingers bled inside my gloves. My shoulders felt like they'd been stabbed with dull knives. The world blurred into a white haze. Then I heard it, heavy breathing behind me. I turned and saw a prisoner collapsing slowly, as if his body had decided to fall in stages. His legs gave first, then his arms. His face hit the snow with a thud that barely made a sound. The foreman didn't shout. He simply nodded to two guards. They lifted the man by his arms and dragged him toward the tree line. His feet left two straight lines in the snow. Someone whispered, "He'll still be warm enough for the wolves." I swallowed hard, not out of disgust, out of fear that I would be next. When the final whistle blew, I could barely stand. We stumbled back to the barracks like ghosts learning to walk. Inside, the air was warmer. Not warm, just less lethal. The lantern flickered. Men undressed slowly, stripping off gloves that peeled away skin. I fell into my bunk, muscles trembling uncontrollably. My neighbor leaned toward me, his eyes dark hollows. "If you want to survive," he whispered, "you must learn the second truth they never tell you." I looked at him, barely able to speak. "What truth?" He scanned the room, making sure no one was listening, especially not the informers. "The guards aren't the worst part of this place." He paused, letting the silence tighten around us. The prisoners are. Before I could ask what he meant, the door slammed open. A guard shouted my number. 427B, he said. Lieutenant wants you. Now. The barracks went silent. I knew what that meant, and I wasn't sure if I'd be coming back. The guard didn't wait for me to put my boots on properly. He yanked me by the collar, dragging me through the barracks door into the freezing night. The air slapped me so hard my lungs folded. Snowflakes swirled in the lamplight like ash. The other prisoners didn't look at me as I left. Looking was dangerous. Looking meant caring. Caring meant pain. The lieutenant's hut stood apart from the rest, a single yellow window glowing dimly through frost. The guard shoved me inside. The heat hit me first, thick, heavy, almost suffocating compared to the outside. A metal stove hissed in the corner. Frost melted from my eyelashes. The lieutenant sat at a desk with a stack of papers, a cigarette burning in an overflowing tray. He didn't look at me right away. He finished writing something with slow, deliberate strokes, as if my life wasn't waiting in the room with him. Finally, he glanced up. "You worked slowly today," he said. I swallowed. "I'm new. You think that makes you special?" I shook my head. He watched me for a moment, eyes half closed. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled cigarette smoke toward the ceiling. "Did you say anything this morning?" he asked casually. My stomach tightened. So this was about the informer system. "No," I said. "Nothing." He grinned. Not a friendly grin, but the grin of a man who enjoyed peeling wings off insects. "We have ears everywhere. Someone said you asked about your sentence." My throat tightened. The older prisoner's warning replayed in my mind. There are informers in every barrack. Never trust a smile. "I didn't ask," I said. He tapped his pencil lightly on the desk. "Funny, someone heard you." He stood, walked around the table, and stopped inches from me. I could smell his tobacco, his sweat, the iron tang of the pistol on his belt. "Tell me," he said softly. "Did you say anything? Anything at all?" "No," I whispered. He studied me like a surgeon deciding where to make the first cut. Then, unexpectedly, he shrugged. "Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the man who reported you will disappear first instead." The room tilted. My legs felt weak. He turned away. "Go. And remember, someone is always listening." I stepped out into the night before he changed his mind. The cold sucked the air from my lungs again, but this time the cold felt safer than the lieutenant's warmth. When I reached the barracks, everyone was awake, even those pretending to sleep. Eyes watched me from shadows. A man at the far end shifted on his bunk, making room for me to pass. He whispered without moving his lips. "What did he ask you?" I shook my head. "Nothing." Another voice hissed from the darkness. "He doesn't ask nothing. You're lying." I hesitated. The silence thickened. This was what the informer system did. It fractured trust until everyone feared everyone. Some men reported others just to gain an extra ladle of soup. Some did it to avoid a beating. Some did it because the Gulag broke them so completely that serving the guards felt like the only form of power they had left. The man beside me leaned close. "Tell us the truth," he whispered. "Did you ask about your sentence?" "No," I repeated. A voice from the top bunk said, "He's covering for someone." Someone else muttered, "He's the informer." The air suddenly felt thin and dangerous. Before anything could happen, the door opened and the foreman stepped inside. "Work detail starts early tomorrow," he barked. "Eat and sleep, if you can." He left without waiting for acknowledgement. The murmurs died instantly. Everyone knew better than to continue a conversation after a foreman entered. Men had been taken outside and shot for less. I crawled into my bunk. My neighbor whispered, "Don't worry about what they say. The informer isn't in this barrack." "How do you know?" He didn't answer. Later, as the lantern's flame shrank and the cold crept in, I heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy, stopping directly in front of our door. The handle twitched, then stilled. Someone was listening. No one in the barracks breathed. Finally, the footsteps continued into the distance. A man above me exhaled shakily. "That wasn't a guard," he whispered. I closed my eyes. "Then who was it?" He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was a thin thread of fear. "Another prisoner, from a different barrack, someone with permission to walk after lights out, someone we don't talk about." He shuddered. "They never told the world about men like him. Not even the guards say his name." I felt chills crawl up my spine. "Who is he?" The man swallowed. "The one who listens. The lieutenant calls him a trusty, but we call him something else." "What?" He hesitated until even the shadows seemed to lean closer. "The wolf." I lay awake long after the barracks fell silent, replaying the image of footsteps outside the door. The guards were terrifying, but what frightened the prisoners was always something worse. And the wolf had heard me breathe. I barely slept after hearing about the wolf. In the Gulag, rumors traveled faster than footsteps, but this one felt different, heavier, like it carried weight even the guards feared. A prisoner with freedom to walk at night, a prisoner trusted more than a guard. That kind of man wasn't just dangerous, he was necessary. The Soviets never put him in archives, never admitted such people existed. But every camp had one. Morning came with the familiar whistle that stabbed the dawn like a knife. We rose in shivers. Frost coated our blankets. The man above me climbed down stiffly, his breath rattling like old machinery. He didn't look at me as he whispered, "Work fast today. They're watching." I didn't ask who they were. In the Gulag, you didn't want the answer. Outside, the cold wrapped around us like wet iron. Men lined up, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. The guards counted quickly. When they reached the front of the line, the foreman said, "We're short one." No one moved. No one volunteered a name. The foreman spat. "He must have run." A guard laughed sharply. "No one runs. Wolves eat runners." The way he said wolves made my stomach twist. He didn't mean animals. We marched to the worksite. Today's task was digging new trenches along the frozen road, trenches the Soviets claimed were for drainage. But we all knew the truth. They were graves in waiting. Shallow, long, and always in the shade so the bodies would freeze and stack neatly. We dug in silence. The ground was harder than stone. My fingers bled again through the gloves. Men grunted softly, each breath turning into a small gust of frost. The sky was gray, but not the usual gray. It had a poison tint, like something was brewing behind the clouds. Around noon, a prisoner near the front collapsed. His knees hit the ground with a thud. No one stopped. Stopping meant the cold would take you too. The guard walked over, nudged the man with his boot, and sighed. "Lazy," he said. Then, with surprising gentleness, he pulled the man by the collar and dragged him aside. No one acknowledged it. Death had become as routine as lunch. While digging, I sensed someone watching me. Not the guards, they watched everyone. This gaze felt closer, quieter, sharper. I turned my head slightly and saw him. A prisoner standing beyond the tree line, wearing no hat, no gloves, no panic. His face was calm, almost bored. He leaned against a pine trunk as if he'd chosen the cold. His eyes locked onto mine, flat, dark, expressionless, wolf-like. I froze. My shovel slipped from my hands. A guard snapped, "Pick it up!" When I looked again, the man in the trees had vanished. During lunch break, thin soup, chunks of ice floating in it, the older prisoner from my bunk sat beside me. He stirred his bowl tirelessly, as if he expected something to appear at the bottom. "You saw him," he murmured without looking at me. I didn't answer. "You did," he repeated. "I can see it in your face." "Who is he?" I whispered. He shook his head. "Not who. What?" He kept stirring. "He's the one the lieutenant uses when he needs something done quietly. A prisoner who hunts other prisoners, reports to the NKVD, gets extra rations, warm boots, permission to walk at night. They call him a trusty. But everyone else," he swallowed, "calls him the wolf." "Why?" I asked. "Because he tears men apart without touching them." He lowered his voice. "He listens. He waits. He chooses." A long pause. "And once he chooses, you don't come back." We returned to work in tighter silence than usual. Late in the afternoon, a guard shouted for us to stop. "Line up," he barked. We formed a crooked row. Another guard pulled a prisoner forward, a thin man with shaking hands. "This dog tried to steal bread," the guard said. "Bread. The smallest crime in a world where hunger hollowed out every man." The guard pointed at the ground. "Punishment box." A ripple of dread moved through the line. The punishment box wasn't a cell. It wasn't even a room. It was a coffin-shaped freezer made of metal sheets packed with ice. Men didn't scream in the box, they didn't have the strength. Some lasted 3 hours, some lasted 1. They pushed the man inside. He whimpered once before the lid slammed shut. The foreman checked his watch. 3 hours, he said. If he's alive after that, we'll see. The guards returned to their posts. The narrator inside me knew one truth the Soviets never admitted. The Gulag didn't just punish crimes, it punished weakness. We kept digging. At dusk, I saw movement again at the tree line, a figure walking slowly between the trunks, watching. The wolf. His head tilted, as if evaluating something, and then he raised a hand, pointing at me. My blood froze harder than the ground. When work ended, we ran back to the barracks for warmth. As I entered, someone grabbed my arm, the older prisoner from my bunk, his face pale. "He marked you," he whispered. "The wolf pointed at you." "What does that mean?" I asked, throat tight. He hesitated. "It means tonight," he said. "Someone is going to disappear." Before I could speak, a guard's voice echoed from outside. 427B, report to the lieutenant's hut immediately." The older prisoner's eyes widened with horror. "It's you," he whispered, "and he's already chosen." The guard didn't bother repeating my number. He didn't need to. Everyone in the barracks already knew what it meant when a man was summoned after dark. Some prisoners didn't even look at me as I stood. Others watched with quiet pity, the kind that doesn't offer comfort because comfort was dangerous. The older prisoner beside me squeezed my wrist once, just once, and whispered, "If the lieutenant is alone, you might live. If the wolf is there, don't speak, don't move, don't give him anything." I stepped outside into the night. It was quiet in the way only deathly cold places can be. Sound froze before it had the chance to travel. The aurora flickered green across the sky, ghostly ribbons twisting above the camp. Snow crackled under my boots. Every breath stung. The guard walked ahead of me, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He wasn't tense. He wasn't angry. He was bored. That frightened me more than anything. Routine meant this happened often. When we reached the lieutenant's hut, the guard knocked twice. A voice inside said, "Send him in." The guard opened the door and shoved me inside. Then he left, closing the door behind me. At first, all I saw was the stove. Its orange glow cast long shadows across the room. The lieutenant sat behind his desk, same as before, cigarette burning between 2 fingers. But he wasn't alone. A man stood in the far corner, half in darkness. I recognized him immediately. The wolf. He didn't move when I entered, didn't blink. He just watched me with the flat, hungry calm of a predator, evaluating whether the thing in front of him was worth the trouble. The lieutenant gestured toward a stool. "Sit." My knees didn't trust me, but I obeyed. The stool's wood was painfully cold. The lieutenant tapped ash from his cigarette, studying me with the faint smile of someone rehearsing kindness for sport. "You've adjusted to camp life quickly," he said. "Most new inmates collapse their first week." I didn't answer. He continued, "We had an incident today, a missing ration. Some prisoners say they saw you near the storage shed." My chest tightened. I hadn't been anywhere near the shed, but truth meant nothing here, only usefulness and fear. "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. The wolf shifted slightly, barely a movement, just enough to remind me he existed. The lieutenant nodded as if he expected that answer. "Do you know why the informer system works so well?" I swallowed. "No," he smiled wider. "Because prisoners distrust each other more than they fear us." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Weak men betray for bread, strong men betray for power, and the clever ones." He glanced at the wolf. "Learn betrayal's just another word for survival." He stood and paced behind me, slow enough for dread to follow every step. "You see," he said softly, "in a place like this, truth is elastic. It stretches until it fits whatever purpose we need. So when a ration goes missing, perhaps no one took it, or perhaps everyone did." He stopped behind my shoulder. I felt his breath on my neck. "But someone must always pay." Silence, heavy, waiting. Finally, he circled back to his desk. "Here's the problem," he said. "Someone has accused you, but I'm not convinced." I almost breathed in relief until he continued. And that means we need clarity. He nodded toward the wolf. He will decide. The wolf stepped forward. The firelight revealed his face fully this time. Sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes, skin pulled tight over bone. He looked like hunger shaped into a human body. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He circled me once, slowly, examining. His boots made almost no sound on the wooden floor. When he stopped in front of me, he tilted his head and stared into my eyes, searching for something only he understood. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed my forearm. His grip was ice. He held it for a long, unbearable moment. Then he pushed my sleeve up. The lieutenant leaned forward, watching. The wolf studied my wrist, my hand, my fingernails. Then he let go and stepped back. "He's innocent," the wolf said quietly. His voice was softer than I expected. Not gentle, just empty, like someone reading a report they didn't care about. The lieutenant shrugged. "Very well," he glanced at me. "You may go." I stood slowly, legs shaking. The wolf was already back in the corner, eyes unreadable. As I moved toward the door, the lieutenant added, "Oh, and 427B?" I turned. "Tomorrow we're assigning new work crews, harder tasks, more cold. You'll be in Group 3. My stomach dropped. Group 3 was the worst detail. Men lasted days on it. The lieutenant smiled thinly. "Consider it a chance to prove your loyalty to the system." I nodded because I had no choice. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a hammer. I breathed in deeply, trying to steady my heartbeat. Snow drifted softly across the yard. The barracks lights glowed faintly in the distance. Halfway back to my bunk, I heard a crunch behind me, a footstep. I froze. Another step, slow, deliberate. I turned. The wolf stood 10 meters away, his silhouette just visible in the dim starlight. He didn't approach, didn't threaten. He simply watched me. "Remember this," he said. His breath curled in the cold. "You weren't saved tonight." A pause. "You were chosen." Then he stepped back into the darkness until his shape dissolved completely. I ran the rest of the way to the barracks. Inside, the older prisoner saw my face and whispered, terrified, "What did he do to you?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the work bell rang early. Far too early. The entire barracks froze. Something was wrong, very wrong, and every man knew it. The guard didn't bother repeating my number. He didn't need to. Everyone in the barracks already knew what it meant when a man was summoned after dark. Some prisoners didn't even look at me as I stood. Others watched with quiet pity, the kind that doesn't offer comfort because comfort was dangerous. The older prisoner beside me squeezed my wrist once, just once, and whispered, "If the lieutenant is alone, you might live. If the wolf is there, don't speak. Don't move. Don't give him anything." I stepped outside into the night. It was quiet in the way only deathly cold places can be. Sound froze before it had the chance to travel. The aurora flickered green across the sky, ghostly ribbons twisting above the camp. Snow crackled under my boots. Every breath stung. The guard walked ahead of me, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He wasn't tense, he wasn't angry, he was bored. That frightened me more than anything. Routine meant this happened often. When we reached the lieutenant's hut, the guard knocked twice. A voice inside said, "Send him in." The guard opened the door and shoved me inside. Then he left, closing the door behind me. At first, all I saw was the stove. Its orange glow cast long shadows across the room. The lieutenant sat behind his desk, same as before, cigarette burning between two fingers. But he wasn't alone. A man stood in the far corner, half in darkness. I recognized him immediately. The wolf. He didn't move when I entered, didn't blink. He just watched me with the flat, hungry calm of a predator, evaluating whether the thing in front of him was worth the trouble. The lieutenant gestured toward a stool. "Sit." My knees didn't trust me, but I obeyed. The stool's wood was painfully cold. The lieutenant tapped ash from his cigarette, studying me with the faint smile of someone rehearsing kindness for sport. "You've adjusted to camp life quickly," he said. "Most new inmates collapse their first week." I didn't answer. He continued, "We had an incident today. A missing ration. Some prisoners say they saw you near the storage shed. My chest tightened. I hadn't been anywhere near the shed, but truth meant nothing here. Only usefulness and fear. I didn't take anything, I said quietly. The wolf shifted slightly, barely a movement, just enough to remind me he existed. The lieutenant nodded, as if he expected that answer. Do you know why the informer system works so well? I swallowed. No, he smiled wider. Because prisoners distrust each other more than they fear us. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Weak men betray for bread. Strong men betray for power. And the clever ones, he glanced at the wolf, learn betrayal is just another word for survival. He stood and paced behind me, slow enough for dread to follow every step. You see, he said softly, in a place like this, truth is elastic. It stretches until it fits whatever purpose we need. So when a ration goes missing, perhaps no one took it. Or perhaps everyone did. He stopped behind my shoulder. I felt his breath on my neck. But someone must always pay. Silence. Heavy. Waiting. Finally, he circled back to his desk. Here's the problem, he said. Someone has accused you, but I'm not convinced. I almost breathed in relief until he continued. And that means we need clarity. He nodded toward the wolf. He will decide. The wolf stepped forward. The firelight revealed his face fully this time. Sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes, skin pulled tight over bone. He looked like hunger shaped into a human body. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He circled me once, slowly, examining. His boots made almost no sound on the wooden floor. When he stopped in front of me, he tilted his head and stared into my eyes, searching for something only he understood. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed my forearm. His grip was ice. He held it for a long, unbearable moment. Then he pushed my sleeve up. The lieutenant leaned forward, watching. The wolf studied my wrist, my hand, my fingernails. Then he let go and stepped back. He's innocent, the wolf said quietly. His voice was softer than I expected, not gentle, just empty, like someone reading a report they didn't care about. The lieutenant shrugged. Very well. He glanced at me. You may go. I stood slowly, legs shaking. The wolf was already back in the corner, eyes unreadable. As I moved toward the door, the lieutenant added, Oh, and Ford on 27B? I turned. Tomorrow we're assigning new work crews, harder tasks, more cold. You'll be in Group 3. My stomach dropped. Group 3 was the worst detail. Men lasted days on it. The lieutenant smiled thinly. Consider it a chance to prove your loyalty to the system. I nodded because I had no choice. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a hammer. I breathed in deeply, trying to steady my heartbeat. Snow drifted softly across the yard. The barracks lights glowed faintly in the distance. Halfway back to my bunk, I heard a crunch behind me. A footstep. I froze. Another step. Slow. Deliberate. I turned. The wolf stood 10 meters away, his silhouette just visible in the dim starlight. He didn't approach, didn't threaten. He simply watched me. Remember this, he said. His breath curled in the cold. You weren't saved tonight. A pause. You were chosen. Then he stepped back into the darkness until his shape dissolved completely. I ran the rest of the way to the barracks. Inside, the older prisoner saw my face and whispered, terrified, What did he do to you? I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, the work bell rang early, far too early. The entire barracks froze. Something was wrong, very wrong, and every man knew it. The bell kept ringing long after it should have stopped, its metal cry slicing through the dark like something desperate, something unplanned. Bells didn't ring early in Kolyma. Bells meant routine, order, predictability, the only fragile structure in a world built to break men. When something broke that routine, fear spread faster than cold. Men scrambled from their bunks, boots half on, scarves thrown around necks blindly. Nobody spoke, nobody asked why. In the Gulag, questions were an invitation for punishment. We followed the guards into the yard, breath shaking out of us in frantic clouds. Night still owned the sky. The aurora above us flickered weakly, as if tired from too many months of watching us freeze. The guards formed two lines, rifles already in their hands, boots crunching on ice. The foreman paced, muttering under his breath, flicking frost from his gloves. The lieutenant emerged last, his coat pulled tight, face stiff. He looked angrier than usual, but also unsettled. That alone was terrifying. A frightened lieutenant meant something in the camp had gone wrong enough to shake even the men who enforced death casually. He cleared his throat. "We have an incident," he said. Every man stood still, waiting. "One of the storage sheds was broken into," he continued. "Food is missing." A ripple of panic passed through us, small as the twitch of a dying nerve. Food theft was no ordinary crime. In the Gulag, it was more serious than murder, because the Gulag was fed by starvation. Any threat to starvation was punished with something worse than death. The lieutenant scanned the crowd. "Until we identify the culprit, all rations are reduced." A low groan rose from the prisoners, an instinctive, helpless sound. Reduced rations meant someone would die today. Several, perhaps, and not from punishment, but from hunger tightening its grip. But the lieutenant wasn't finished. "We know whoever did it had access," he said. "We know it wasn't random." He gestured toward the barracks. "We also know someone here has been seen near the sheds at night." My heartbeat spiked. My throat dried instantly. Someone had seen me walking back from the lieutenant's hut last night. Someone could easily have mistaken that for sneaking near the sheds. He paced slowly down the line, examining each face like a snake choosing where to bite. When he reached my row, he paused. His eyes lingered on me. And somewhere behind him, like a shadow cast without light, the wolf stood watching. The lieutenant moved on. He stopped in front of a thin man named Kasparov, someone I barely knew, someone who kept to himself and spoke only when spoken to. A harmless man. A quiet man. "You," the lieutenant said. Kasparov's eyes widened. The lieutenant didn't let him finish. He nodded at two guards. "Take him." They grabbed Kasparov by the arms. He kicked, screamed, a horrible, brittle sound, shouting, "I didn't do anything! Please, please!" A guard clubbed him across the mouth. Blood splattered on the snow. The lieutenant exhaled softly, almost disappointed. "Noisy," he said. Kasparov was dragged across the yard, his boots carving desperate lines behind him. The wolf watched, unreadable. The lieutenant faced us again. "This is what happens to those who threaten discipline." He pointed to a metal structure near the tree line, a steel shed we all knew too well. The punishment box. No one survived more than a few hours in it. "Put him inside," the lieutenant said. One guard hesitated. "Sir, it's -42 tonight." "Then he'll confess quickly," the lieutenant replied. Kasparov screamed again as they shoved him into the box, but the sound was choked by metal. The lid slammed. A lock clicked. Snow fell silently on top of it, as if nature itself wanted to bury him early. We were ordered back to work. We didn't get breakfast. We marched toward the forest, heads down, hearts trembling. Every man understood the truth the Soviets never wrote down. Punishments never targeted guilt. They targeted example. As we worked, the sound of chopping faded into numb rhythm. My fingers felt like bone. My breath burned. I couldn't stop thinking about Kasparov locked inside that frozen coffin. Hours passed. When the sun barely lifted above the horizon, more blush than light, we heard footsteps behind us. A guard approached briskly, out of breath. "Open the box," he said. "Lieutenant wants him out." Some men glanced at one another. This was unusual. They never opened the box early. We walked back together, every step heavy with dread. The wolf and the lieutenant stood beside the box. The lieutenant gestured. "Open it." A guard unlocked the metal. Frost exploded outward in a cloud. Inside, Kasparov sat upright, eyes wide, mouth frozen open, dead. But not from the cold. His face was twisted in terror. On his throat, marks, finger-shaped. The lieutenant stared, jaw tightening. He wasn't alone in there. The wolf stepped forward. Someone opened the box. Impossible. None of us had keys. None of us would go near the box. The lieutenant looked at the wolf. "Do you know who?" The wolf nodded once. "Yes?" The lieutenant pointed at him. "Then find him." The wolf turned slowly toward us, toward the line of exhausted prisoners, and his eyes stopped on me. "You," he said. My knees nearly buckled. I couldn't speak. The wolf took a step forward. "You're coming with me." The lieutenant didn't object. No one breathed. I felt the cold deepen around me as if the world had decided I no longer needed warmth. I followed the wolf away from the crowd, deeper into the trees. Every step felt like the last one I would ever take. The wolf didn't speak as we walked. His boots made almost no sound, while mine crunched loudly in the snow. It felt wrong, like prey announcing itself while the predator glided silently behind. The forest swallowed us quickly, the camp shrinking behind the curtain of pines until the last lantern glow disappeared. The cold here was deeper, older, untouched by the fires of the barracks or the breath of prisoners. My heartbeat seemed too loud in this silence. Even the trees felt like they were listening. When we were far enough that the camp sounds had faded completely, the wolf stopped. I froze too, afraid of even the smallest movement. He stood still for a long time, staring at the snow beneath our feet as if reading messages written in frost. "You think I accused you," he finally said. His voice was calm, too calm. "I didn't," I whispered. He turned his head slightly, studying me with those unsettling, unblinking eyes. "I know you didn't kill Kasparov," he said. "I know you didn't open the box. You barely know how to stay warm." I swallowed. "Then why bring me out here?" "So you don't die tonight." The cold suddenly felt sharper. "What do you mean?" "The lieutenant wanted someone blamed," he said. "If I hadn't named you, he would have chosen someone weaker, someone who couldn't survive the walk, someone who wouldn't survive my company." He turned fully toward me. "You, at least, can keep up." I didn't know whether that was comfort or threat. He stepped closer until his face was inches from mine. "Kasparov didn't steal the rations," he whispered, "and he didn't freeze to death." "I know," I said. I saw his throat. The wolf nodded. "Someone killed him before he entered the box, and someone wanted it to look like he died inside." My breath shook. "Was it a guard?" I asked. He shook his head. "Guards kill in the open. They don't waste effort staging things. No. This was done by someone who understands us." He tapped his chest lightly. "A prisoner." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Why would a prisoner frame him?" I asked. The wolf's eyes drifted upward, scanning the dark tree canopy. "Because he needed the lieutenant distracted. Because he needed fear to spread. Because he needed chaos." He began walking again. I followed, legs trembling. After a moment he said, "Do you know why escape attempts stopped happening here?" "Because they never worked," I said. "The cold, the wolves, the guards." He laughed softly, an eerie, humorless sound. "No. People stopped escaping because the last group that tried was hunted inside the forest." I stiffened. "By guards?" He shook his head slowly. "By someone who knew the trees better, someone who moved at night, someone who killed them one by one and brought back only parts." My stomach twisted. I mean there are men in this camp who lost themselves a long time ago," he said. "The Gulag didn't break them. It hollowed them out, made them something else." We stopped at a clearing where the snow was disturbed. Footprints, crushed branches, signs of struggle. The wolf knelt and brushed his fingers across the snow. "Look," he said. I crouched. The prints were too small for guards, too deep for someone walking calmly. They circled in tight, frantic patterns, drag marks, blood, tiny dark flecks frozen into the surface. Kasparov hadn't died in the box. He had died here. The wolf stood. "He was strangled," he said, quickly, efficiently, then carried back. My voice shook. "Why carry him back?" "To hide the real threat," he said. "A man dying in the box is normal." He gestured at the ground. "This isn't." A branch cracked behind us. Both of us froze. The wolf lifted a hand silently. I held my breath. The forest seemed to hold its breath too. Then another sound, soft, deliberate steps crushing snow in a slow, measured rhythm. Not an animal. A man. The wolf moved first. He pushed me behind him, eyes narrowing. "He's watching us." "Who?" I whispered. "The one who killed Kasparov." The footsteps stopped. A faint silhouette appeared between the trees, thin, hunched, almost ghost-like. He stood perfectly still, head tilted as if listening. The moonlight barely touched his face, but I saw enough to freeze my blood. His eyes were wide, unblinking, empty of anything human. The wolf whispered, "Don't move." The figure took one small step forward. I felt my legs turn numb. The wolf stepped forward too, blocking me from sight. "Go," he said under his breath. "Walk back to the camp. Slowly. Don't run. Don't speak. Don't look at him." "What about you?" I whispered. The wolf didn't answer. He just broke a piece of frozen branch off a nearby tree and held it like a blade. "Go," he repeated. I backed away one step at a time, snow crunching softly. The figure didn't look at me. His stare was locked on the wolf. The wolf whispered one last thing before I disappeared into the trees. "Tell the lieutenant this wasn't a prisoner. Tell him something else is living in this camp." I took another step, then another. A sickening metallic sound echoed behind me, a breath, a grunt, a sudden burst of movement. I turned and saw shapes colliding in the snow. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches whipped my face, my breath tore at my lungs, and the darkness swallowed everything behind me. I didn't stop until the camp lights flickered through the trees. When I stumbled into the yard, half frozen and shaking, a guard grabbed me instantly. "What happened?" he barked. "Where's the wolf?" I opened my mouth and realized I had no idea whether the wolf was alive or whether the thing he faced was now following me. No one slept that night. The barracks shook with the wind, but it wasn't the cold that kept us awake. It was the scream we couldn't unhear. The guards ran through the yard with lanterns, shouting orders no one could follow because terror had already filled every corner of the camp. Some prisoners whispered prayers, others clutched their blankets like shields. A few stared blankly into the darkness as if trying to understand what had just broken loose inside the fences. I sat upright on my bunk, heart pounding, listening for footsteps. The barracks felt too small, too thin, too fragile. At any moment the wooden walls could splinter and let something in, something that wasn't supposed to exist. At dawn, or what passed for dawn in this frozen world, the lieutenant ordered all prisoners into the yard. We stood in ragged lines, shaking, our breath rising in thick clouds. The foreman strutted back and forth, shouting numbers, but his voice cracked. Even he was afraid. Then the lieutenant emerged from his hut. He looked exhausted, eyes red, face pale. He held his belt like he might need to use it to defend himself. Behind him stood 2 guards armed with rifles, loaded, fingers already on triggers. He faced us, jaw tight. "Last night," he said, "a prisoner violated curfew and fled across the yard. That was a lie, and every man knew it. He was caught beyond the south fence," the lieutenant added, "and dealt with." Another lie. There was no body, no trail, no blood. Just a man swallowed whole by the darkness. But none of us dared speak. "From this moment," the lieutenant continued, "no one leaves the barracks after nightfall. Anyone who does will be shot on sight." He didn't say shot by who. A guard whispered something into his ear. The lieutenant stiffened, then cleared his throat. "Also," he hesitated, unusual for him. "We are missing another prisoner. Someone from barracks too. He was last seen before midnight." That made 3 men in 20 hours. A man beside me muttered, "The forest takes what it wants." A guard struck him across the face, but even the guard didn't argue. We were marched to work, but the pace was slower than usual. The guards kept turning around, rifles raised as if expecting something to burst out of the trees. The foreman tripped twice. He didn't yell at us once. At the worksite, men dug quickly, desperately, as though burying their shovels into the earth would keep something underground where it belonged. Snow fell in loose sheets, the wind howled, branches cracked like bones breaking. But it wasn't the cold that made my hands shake. It was the feeling of being watched, not by guards, by something deeper in the woods. Midday came with no soup break. The foreman said the cooks were delayed. Some men groaned, others whispered that the kitchens had been attacked. I didn't believe it until I saw the smoke. Black smoke, not cooking fire gray, burning. We were marched back early, guards jittery, scanning the tree line as though expecting shadows to leap out at any moment. When we reached camp, the truth hit us immediately. One of the storage sheds was gone, burned to ash. The lieutenant sprinted across the yard, screaming orders. Buckets of snow were thrown onto embers. Guards stumbled in panic. Men whispered that the wolf's killer had returned, braver now, closer. I noticed something else, something worse. Near the burned shed, half hidden by snow, was a trail of footprints, small, bare, human, but spaced too far apart, as if whoever made them didn't walk. They leapt. The lieutenant saw them too. He stared, face drained of color, and whispered something that the wind almost stole from his lips. "Not again. Not this." I stepped closer. "Sir, what is doing this?" He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, he spoke without authority, only fear. "This camp is built on graves," he said, "old ones, before the war, before the first prisoners, before even the Soviets knew what was buried here." His eyes darted to the trees. "We dug into something we shouldn't have, something that was better left frozen." He grabbed my shoulder. "When men starve long enough, something grows inside them, something hungry, something that remembers how to hunt." Before I could respond, a shout tore through the camp. "Lieutenant, we found him!" We rushed toward the voice. A group of guards huddled near the laundry barrack, rifles pointed down. As we approached, I saw a shape lying in the snow, a prisoner, face down, clothes torn, flesh missing, not eaten, not exactly. More like torn away in long, rough strips, as if fingers, not teeth, had ripped skin from bone. The lieutenant knelt beside the body. His hands trembled as he turned the man over. I recognized the face instantly. It was the guard who had taken me to the forest the night the wolf disappeared. His throat was crushed, his eyes frozen wide in terror. But what made the lieutenant recoil wasn't the wounds. It was the chest, carved into the skin, shallow and jagged. A symbol, 2 slashes, then 1, then 2, a pattern, a warning, a message. The lieutenant stood slowly. "This isn't madness," he whispered. "This is ritual." The guards stepped back, faces pale. One muttered a prayer. That was when we heard the scream. Not from a man, not from a guard, from somewhere deep inside the trees, a sound so sharp, so unnatural, so hungry that every prisoner stumbled backward. The lieutenant's lantern flickered, and then we realized the scream wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming toward us, fast, very fast. The scream came closer, so fast it felt like the air itself was being torn apart before the sound even reached us. Guards raised their rifles, but their hands trembled so violently the barrels jerked back and forth. Prisoners scattered, slipping on the frozen ground. Some ran toward the barracks, others dropped to their knees, covering their heads out of instinct. I stood frozen, breath trapped in my throat, muscles locked as if the cold had seeped into my bones and refused to leave. The lieutenant shouted something, but the wind swallowed his voice. A guard fired blindly into the trees. The muzzle flash flickered once, then again. Snow exploded where the bullets landed. But nothing stopped. The scream kept rushing toward us, a sound that didn't belong to anything human. Then silence. Total. Absolute. Heavy. The kind of silence that only exists right before a predator strikes. "Stay together," the lieutenant yelled. "Stay!" A shape burst from the tree line. It moved so fast the snow behind it lifted into the air like feathers. Guards fired wildly. Bullets snapped through the night. The lieutenant stumbled backward, lantern swinging wildly. I caught a glimpse of the creature, just a glimpse. The body hunched, thin but powerful. The movements sharp, twitching, wrong. A man's frame, a corpse's posture, eyes that didn't shine with life, but with hunger. It slammed into the first guard like a storm hitting an old fence. The man didn't even scream. He went down instantly. Another guard tried to swing his rifle like a club, but the creature caught it mid-air and tore it from his hands with impossible strength. Snow sprayed, blood followed. Men ran in every direction now, no longer prisoners, just terrified animals trying to escape slaughter. The lieutenant fired point blank. The bullet punched into the creature's shoulder, but it didn't slow. Instead, it turned its head toward him, tilting it in a way no living neck should bend. I saw its face, and I wished I never had. Its skin was stretched too tight, cracked in places, blue with cold and rot, lips torn, teeth broken, but the eyes. God. The eyes were wide, furious, starving, like a man who had died in despair and returned with only one instinct left: hunger. The lieutenant screamed for help. None came. The creature lunged. They crashed into the snow, rolling violently. The lantern dropped beside them, flames spilling across the frost. Shadows danced wildly, and through them I saw the lieutenant's arm pinned under a knee, his face twisting in terror as he tried to reach for his pistol. The creature struck first. His hand wrapped around the lieutenant's throat, long fingers, blue skin, frostbitten nails, and that's when I realized something that made my stomach drop through the earth. Those hands, I had seen them before. The marks on Kasparov's neck, the marks on the guard's corpse. This wasn't something new. This was something old, something starving long before we arrived. The lieutenant gasped for air, eyes bulging. "Shoot it!" he cried. But the guards were dead, and the prisoners had fled. I took a step backward, heart pounding so loud it drowned the world. The creature shoved the lieutenant into the snow, pinning him like he weighed nothing. His breath came out in white bursts that got smaller, shallower. Then, suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night. The creature jerked. The wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, pale, bleeding, barely standing. His missing hand was wrapped in cloth soaked through, and his remaining hand shook as he lowered the pistol. For a moment, I thought he had killed it. Then the creature turned its head. Slowly, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled from below the earth. It stood, blood dripping from its fingers. The wolf raised the gun again, but before he could fire, the creature lunged. They collided with a sickening crunch, rolling across the ground. Snow flew. The wolf screamed, a raw human sound of someone fighting with everything they had left. I wanted to run. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. Something inside me refused to look away. The wolf fought, savagely. Punches, kicks, wild swings. But he was weak. Too weak. The creature overpowered him easily, pressing him into the snow. The wolf's voice cracked. "Run!" he yelled at me. "Run!" I turned and I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't think. I sprinted across the yard, slipping, sliding, crashing into snowdrifts. Behind me, I heard one final scream, cut short instantly. The sound hit me harder than the cold ever had. I stumbled into the barracks, men huddled in corners, shaking, whispering frantic prayers. Someone grabbed my coat. "What is it? What's happening?" I couldn't speak, not at first. I collapsed onto my bunk, lungs burning. Then, finally, words tore out of me. "It's here," I whispered, "inside the camp." The barracks went silent. A guard blew the whistle, long and sharp. Another screamed for reinforcements. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. Total darkness. Men gasped in terror. Then something moved outside. Fast, heavy, circling, and as we all held our breath, paralyzed by terror, a soft sound reached us through the wooden wall, a scratching sound, slow, deliberate, hungry. The creature had returned to finish what the night had started, and there were no guards left to stop it.